I had always known my family was complicated, but I never imagined how deep the cracks ran until that morning. For years, I had poured myself into every job I could find, sacrificing sleep, social life, even my own comfort just to earn something for myself. Finally, I had a stable salary, money I had worked for, every coin a reminder of my independence. But independence, I soon realized, was exactly what my parents feared. It started innocuously, at first. My brother would casually mention his desires, and my parents would look at me, their faces softening in that peculiar way, the kind that always made me feel like my own achievements were never quite enough. "Maybe you can help him out," my mother said once, her voice gentle but laced with expectation. And for a while I gave. I didn't think twice, after all, it was family. But as the months passed, the requests became demands. My hard-earned money was no longer my own. It was theirs by default. When I finally said no, it was like stepping into an invisible war zone. My refusal wasn't out of malice. It was self-preservation. I had dreams, goals, and bills I needed to pay. I had boundaries, and for the first time I was standing by them. But the reaction I received was worse than anything I could have imagined. My parents looked at me not with disappointment, but with something darker, a mixture of anger and calculation. The warmth that had once been there, the comforting presence of a family that should have had my back, vanished. A week later, I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. My parents were talking to someone on the phone, their voices low and tense. The word lawyer floated across the room, and then, legally unfit. My stomach dropped, my hands trembled. Could they really be doing this? Could the people who gave me life, the people I trusted most, actually move to take away my autonomy over money, my right to make decisions for myself? I confronted them, my voice shaking but firm. "Are you really going to hire a lawyer to declare me unfit because I said no?" My father's eyes narrowed, my mother's face went pale for a moment, and then, almost rehearsed, they smiled. "We're just worried about you. We want what's best for the family." The words were hollow. I knew better. This wasn't concern. This was control, dressed up in the language of love. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at my bank statement, the numbers glowing like small victories I had earned through sweat and late nights. And yet, they wanted it all, not because they needed it, but because they thought they could take it. I thought about the years I had spent supporting them, the times I had shielded my brother from consequences, the sacrifices I had made. And for the first time I felt an unfamiliar, sharp sting of betrayal, so deep it felt like it might hollow me out from the inside. I realized then that this wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about recognition, about being seen as my own person rather than a tool for someone else's ambitions. And in that quiet, sleepless night, something inside me hardened. I would not let them dictate my life. I would not let their schemes define me. I would fight, not just for my money, but for my dignity. And somewhere deep down, I allowed myself a thought that had been forbidden for years. Maybe it was time for them to feel the weight of their own betrayal. The days leading up to the court date were some of the hardest I had ever faced. Every time I walked past my parents, I felt their eyes on me, sharp and calculating, as if they were trying to read my thoughts and find a weakness. The house, once a place of comfort, had transformed into a battleground. Every conversation was a test, every smile a trap. I couldn't trust anything they said. And I had learned to stop hoping for fairness from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I spent hours preparing, gathering evidence of their manipulation, bank statements showing how they had mismanaged money, letters and messages that revealed their pressure tactics, even small recordings of conversations where they had tried to twist my words. It was strange, recording them. I had always avoided confrontation, but now it felt like armor. The lawyer they had hired was supposedly the best in town, someone they thought would intimidate me. But I knew that truth was stronger than intimidation. I just needed the courage to wield it. My friends noticed the change in me. Some offered sympathy, others advice, but I couldn't lean on anyone too heavily. This battle had to be mine alone. At night I lay awake, thinking back to my childhood, to moments I had long tried to forget. I remembered my father brushing off my successes, praising my brother for the smallest achievements, and my mother pretending not to see the exhaustion etched into my skin from working extra hours. It wasn't just money that had been taken from me, it was recognition, respect, the idea that my feelings mattered. And now they were trying to take even more. The court summons felt like stepping into an arena where the rules were stacked against me. I arrived early, my heart hammering in my chest, clutching the folder of evidence like a lifeline. Outside, my parents were already there, smug expressions pasted on their faces. My brother lingered nearby, pretending disinterest, though I could see the curiosity in his eyes. I ignored them and focused on the judge's bench, imagining it as a place of truth and justice rather than authority. When the session began, their lawyer presented the case with a confident, almost theatrical air. "Your Honor," he said, "we are here because the defendant has demonstrated a lack of responsibility with their finances and cannot be trusted to manage their own affairs." I could feel the tension in the room, the implied judgment hanging over me like a storm cloud. My parents nodded, satisfied, certain they had orchestrated my downfall. For a moment, I felt fear creep in, but I pushed it back, replacing it with a simmering resolve. When it was my turn, I stood, my voice steady though my hands shook. I laid out everything, the years of being overlooked, the constant demands for my money, the way they had tried to manipulate the law to control me. I presented my evidence meticulously, receipts, messages, testimonies from friends who had witnessed the manipulation. Every document was a small hammer, chipping away at the facade my parents had built so carefully. I saw their faces begin to change, confusion flickering across the carefully maintained masks. By the time I finished, the room was silent. Even the lawyer who had been so sure of victory looked uncomfortable, flipping through papers that contradicted nearly everything he had said. My parents' smug expressions were gone, replaced by a pale, almost imperceptible panic. I realized, in that tense silence, that the tide had turned. I wasn't just defending my independence, I was showing them, and the world, that I had always been capable, always deserving of respect. And for the first time in years, I felt the sweet surge of hope and the first whisper of satisfaction at being finally seen for who I truly was. The day of the hearing arrived with a strange, electric tension in the air. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and paper, but to me, it carried the heavier scent of confrontation and truth waiting to be unveiled. I entered with my folder clutched tightly, my palms sweaty but my mind razor sharp. My parents were already there, sitting side by side, their expressions carefully neutral, though I could sense the confidence in their posture, a confidence I intended to shatter. My brother lingered behind them, pretending to fidget with his phone, but I could see his eyes flicking toward me, curious, uncertain. The lawyer representing my parents started confidently, painting me as reckless, selfish, and incapable of handling my own finances. He spoke in rehearsed tones full of accusations and insinuations, weaving a story meant to strip me of autonomy. "Your Honor," he said, "it is clear that the defendant's actions demonstrate a lack of judgment and responsibility, placing the family at risk." I watched my parents nod, their faces smug, like predators certain of their prey. My chest tightened, but I refused to let fear show. I had prepared for this, and I would not falter. When it was my turn, I rose slowly, letting my presence fill the room. I began quietly, recounting years of manipulation and control, of being pressured to hand over my earnings while my own needs were ignored. I spoke about my achievements, the sacrifices I had made, and the countless times I had shielded my brother from consequences. My voice gained strength as I recounted the truth, each word carefully measured, each fact documented. I presented my evidence, bank statements, recordings, messages, and witnesses who could attest to the relentless pressure and abuse I had endured. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy with expectation. As I methodically dismantled their case, I saw subtle changes in my parents' faces. The confident lines of control softened, and panic flickered in their eyes. Their lawyer tried to interrupt, tried to argue, but each objection was met with evidence that cut through his rehearsed narrative. With every document I revealed, every witness I called, the story they had built, the facade of my incompetence, crumbled. My brother shifted in his seat, unease etched across his features. For years he had benefited from their favoritism, living in the shadow of my compliance, but now he was forced to confront the truth. I saw the first hints of respect, even guilt, cross his face though unspoken. The judge leaned forward, examining the papers and listening intently as I calmly and clearly exposed the manipulation. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the tide turned unmistakably in my favor. Finally, I presented the final piece of evidence, a meticulous timeline showing how my parents had systematically pressured me for money, then attempted to weaponize the law to punish me when I refused. Their faces, once pale with smug certainty, now drained of color entirely. My father's jaw tightened, and my mother's hands trembled slightly as the judge reviewed the documents. The reality of their own deceit was laid bare before them, undeniable and inescapable. In that moment, I felt a wave of vindication wash over me. I wasn't just fighting for my salary, I was fighting for recognition, for respect, for the dignity that had been denied to me for so long. The courtroom had become a mirror, reflecting their betrayal back at them, and the power shift was unmistakable. I realized then that victory wasn't just about money or the law, it was about standing tall in the face of those who had tried to break me and showing them, without malice but with undeniable truth, that I was stronger than they had ever imagined. The courtroom felt almost surreal as the final moments approached. My parents sat frozen, their usual confidence replaced by a pale, strained silence. My brother's eyes darted between us, unspoken questions and dawning realization written all over his face. For the first time, I saw the consequences of their actions reflected not in my own fear, but in the quiet panic of the people who had tried to manipulate me. I could feel the weight of years of frustration and hurt lifting, replaced by a strange, steady calm. I was not the helpless child they had tried to control. I was the person who had refused to bow to their demands, and now the truth was undeniable. The judge's voice finally broke the silence, deliberate and measured. After reviewing all the evidence presented, it is clear that the claims against the defendant are unfounded. The court finds the defendant fully capable of managing their own affairs and upholding their rights independently. The petition to declare the defendant legally unfit is hereby dismissed. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom. My parents' faces went completely pale, their lips pressed tightly together, eyes wide with disbelief. They had spent weeks plotting, confident that the law would be their tool, only to be undone by the very evidence they thought they could hide. I felt a strange surge of satisfaction, not the cruel kind, but the deep, quiet triumph of someone finally being recognized for their worth. I met my brother's gaze, and for the first time, I saw him without the veil of rivalry and entitlement. He looked ashamed, unsure of how to navigate this new reality, where I wasn't just the sibling who complied, but someone who demanded respect. I didn't need him to apologize, though part of me longed to hear it. It was enough to see that the imbalance of power, the hierarchy that had defined our family for so long, was shifting. My parents rose slowly, muttering excuses, but there was no hiding the defeat in their posture. The judge's gavel ended the session, and the room emptied quickly, leaving me standing alone with my folder, my heart still pounding, yet lighter than it had been in years. Outside, the sunlight felt different, almost like a reward for enduring the storm. I could feel my independence not just as a legal fact, but as a tangible reality, a shield that no one could take from me without my consent. I walked past my parents and brother without a word, my steps steady, deliberate. There was no need for confrontation, the truth had spoken louder than any argument, and the weight of their betrayal now rested squarely on their shoulders. I didn't gloat, didn't shout. Revenge had never been about humiliation, it had been about justice and recognition. And in that, I had achieved something far greater than I had dared to imagine. Later that evening, sitting in the quiet of my own room, I allowed myself to reflect. The battle had been exhausting, emotionally and mentally, but it had also been empowering. I realized that the pain of betrayal had shaped me, honed my resilience, and forced me to claim the respect I deserved. I didn't need their approval or their acknowledgement to validate my worth anymore. The court had done that in its own way, but even more importantly, I had done it for myself. For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from the financial control they had tried to impose, but from the emotional weight of their favoritism and manipulation. Sweet revenge, I understood now, wasn't about hurting them back. It was about proving that their attempts to diminish me had failed, and that I could thrive in spite of them. And as the night settled around me, I smiled quietly, knowing that I had finally reclaimed not just my money, but my dignity, my independence, and my voice, the things no one could ever take from me again.